Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us on this panel session, Next Generation Transportation, the Evolution of Getting There. I'm Ryan Kadri, Director of Automotive Technology and Mobility Innovation at the Ontario Centres of Excellence, and I welcome you to this session. I'd like to remind you that if you're tweeting today's session, please use the hashtag OCE Discovery. Emerging technologies will soon revolutionize the way we move. This panel will delve into how leading-edge companies are building reliable and scalable new people-moving systems and the emerging technologies that will enable them. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator today for today's panel. It's Brian Kobus. Brian is a director at OMERS Ventures. Brian is responsible for contributing to the identification and execution of investment opportunities for OMERS Ventures in the technology, media, and telecommunications sector. Please welcome Brian to Discovery.
Thanks very much for having me here, as well as the other panelists. At OMERS Ventures, the future of mobility and the future of transportation is an area that we're excited about. I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting technologies that emerge over the next few years. And the panel here today, I think we'll get to touch upon a few of the different perspectives from the panelists. So I'd like to introduce them all. The first one to my left is Ted Graham. Ted is the head of open innovation at GM, where he helps to identify partnerships that will help to build new forms of mobility, including autonomous and connected vehicles. Ted often speaks to audiences about the 5 things I learned about disruptive innovation as an UberX driver, and how to apply some of these lessons across a multitude of industries on the cusp of disruption. His first-hand account is part of the forthcoming book called The Uber of Everything, to be released later this year. Okay. Welcome, and it's actually out now, so suggest you pick up a copy. Welcome, Ted. In the middle here, we have Walter Kinio, the Vice President of Research and Innovation at Thales Canada Transportation Solutions. Walter works closely together with Thales product strategy and business lines to create innovative solutions to support the Thales urban transportation product strategy. Walter has worked in Canada and Germany on safety-critical, driverless communication-based train protocol systems in a progression of engineering and management roles. He has been involved with every generation upgrade of the Thales CellTrak product family and is recognized in Thales as a CBTC expert. Welcome, Walter. And finally, on my far left is Ryan Janzen, co-founder and CTO of TransPod. Ryan's extensive background in the research and development has led to advances in avionics, optics, mathematical theory, vehicle propulsion, and physics. Smart guy. And he has produced more than 40 scientific papers and presentations, and is a member of the distinguished professional organizations, including the IEEE, Aerospace and Electronic Systems Society. Welcome, Ryan. So there's a lot changing in the world of transportation, and much of that's driven by technology. Maybe as a way to kind of start by framing things up, I'll ask you, Ted, to just kind of highlight for the audience, what are some of the big changes that we should expect to see in the coming years?
Thank you, Brian. So, we try to bucket them into sort of 4 memorable areas that I sort of put as ACEs, as you know. So, autonomous being the first one. We know that the future is going to be driven by urbanization around the world. We've got a very good, strong prediction that 60% of the population will be in urban centers by 2030. So if you think about some of the things that implies, it is trying to reduce congestion in these urban centers, and autonomous is one of those solutions. It's going to be part of a multi-modal transportation solution, we believe. But if you kind of follow through the other parts of ACES, you've got connected. So connected cars, we've had the OnStar system for a couple of decades now, but we're getting into levels of connectivity and the desire for connectivity that we've never seen before. If you would ask a teenager nowadays if they would rather have their driver's license or Wi-Fi, what do you think they'd pick? So, we're seeing much more data usage in our vehicles. Connected cars isn't just about streaming Netflix in the back. We've got my colleague Sean Marshall here in the second row who works on all forms of human factors and connected vehicles. Lots of interesting things happening in that area. And then electrification. We care very much about what's going to happen in these dense urban communities, and we want to have cleaner cities, cleaner transportation. Electrification will also help and enable autonomous fleets. All of those sensor arrays are going to need that electrified platform. You'll actually see the Chevy Bolt if you walk down this way. That's the electric car, which is going to form our very large fleet of autonomous vehicles. And then finally, you alluded to the fact that I was actually an UberX driver, 99 trips over the course of 14 months in the city of Toronto. I am a very big believer in the sharing economy, and that the usage of vehicles in many forms of transportation is going to be increasingly be shared. If we look at the figures of how much cars were being utilized, it was something like 4 or 5% of the time. So, can we actually figure out ways that you could have a shared autonomous fleets that would have multiple passengers, efficient use of people around our cities? So I think that ACES kind of frames up our point of view of where transportation might go in the future.
Okay, awesome. Walter, maybe from your perspective, as Thales, I know, works with many of the largest cities in the world, Ted's kind of outlined how the role of the car is changing a lot. From a city orchestration perspective, what changes, from driven by car as well as other modes of transportation should we be looking at?
Well, I think a big change that we're going to see in the future is integrated systems. So today, holy smokes, today Thales produces driverless mass transit systems. What we're going to see in the future are better systems. We're going to see systems that are integrated with other modes of transportation. So frankly, I think for the commuter of the future, they're going to be able to use social media tools. We're going to have lots of background AI to optimize this travel and to make the journey experience actually a lot more pleasant than it is today. So it could be anywhere from, let's go through all of our companies here. There still will be mass transit. So that's not going to disappear with the autonomous vehicle, because the packaging of an autonomous vehicle is still, a ton or two of steel surrounding 3 or 4 people. The efficiencies for moving a lot of people come from mass transit. But when that person gets to the end of the line, or if they want to go from city to city, I really see systems integrated together where they may be planning their journey and having an autonomous car waiting for them when they step out the door to take them to a mass transit station, to go to another station for intercity travel. It's all going to work together seamlessly. Now, what had been mentioned before is the amount of data. So certainly today what we see in these systems are lots of different isolated communication systems that are working together, but there's a lot of other trends coming. With the huge amounts of data, we're going to see the movement towards the use of public infrastructure combined with either mesh or peer-to-peer networks. And I know we're certainly looking forward to the evolution of 5G networks in the future to be able to move that kind of data. The types of systems that autonomous vehicles use, they just produce staggering amounts of data. And if we want to use that to produce super reliable travel, then we have to have transport layers that are going to support, per vehicle, a gigabit a second of data, if we really want to look at it. So a lot of things are coming together that are very exciting, and I'm looking forward to that journey. I don't want to sit in traffic anymore, so I'm looking forward to the day when I just have this nice, optimized trip.
Way to plan journeys, a much more integrated approach to the different modes of transportation. Now, Ryan, at TransPod, you guys are working on something that could insert sort of a whole new mode of transportation into the equation. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are working on and how it could change getting from A to B.
Yes, well, thank you. We are definitely working in the mass transit domain, but not only using existing systems, but we're completely designing a new mode of transportation. And so if people have heard of the term Hyperloop before, this is part of the background of what we're working on. This actual concept of having a vehicle that goes at extremely high speed through tubes, it's been around for over 100 years. So over the decades, people have worked on the concept in a basic form, but it hasn't been seriously developed until the last couple of years. And then along comes Elon Musk. He actually popularized an existing idea, but it actually takes someone to actually design and build this system, and that's what we're doing right here in Canada. So TransPod is a Canadian company that's developing this system. So all aspects of, it's basically combining aerospace engineering and rail engineering under one roof. And so we're actually designing a spacecraft that is built like an airframe, and it operates like a train. So the idea of frequent departures from stations, so you actually show up at a station and you can get on the next vehicle. It runs at high speed through tubes that are brought to a very low air pressure, and that helps reduce air resistance in these tubes. And so it's a vehicle that is very much like an experience of walking on board a jet when you take a flight. But the key difference is that we're trying to fundamentally improve the energy efficiency, not by a small step, but by a very quantum leap. And so why? Well, that's because with jets, when you fly between cities, you're actually wasting a very large amount of fuel and the carbon emissions that go with that, because an aircraft has to lift its own fuel, and it's fundamentally based on fossil fuel needs because they have to pack all that fuel into the vehicle. And so we completely do away with that because we're going on a level pathway in this guideway in this tube, and it's fully electrically driven. So it's an electric system, and at the same time we do that partly for safety reasons, because all the safety analysis that we're doing, we're actually going according to a spacecraft standard that is one of the most stringent standards out there for safety certification. We have a timeline towards completion where we're undergoing the site selection process for our test track in Canada, and meanwhile working with governments here and overseas on different route designs. So this is a very multifaceted project, and it's basically entails the whole system, working with industrial partners on all the subsystems, and really designing something that's for people though too. So and just like what you were saying about, it's a very human-oriented sort of system and philosophy too, because you have to think about what people want, how this will change people's lives once they go between cities at high speed, how they rethink, living in one place and working in another completely different city, and being able to commute back and forth kind of on a whim. Yeah.
Angle of people, and at the end of the day, transportation is moving people from A to B, and much of the way that our cities are shaped today are shaped by our modes of transportation, and how we move around as it's a big part of our lives. So to change that and move in a different direction, what are some of the benefits that we're going to start to realize from a safety or environmental or standard of life perspective? Anyone want to jump in on kind of a key benefit we can expect? Okay, Walter?
And when you're using these types of systems and they're electrical systems, you can achieve actually significant CO2 and energy reductions. So for operators and systems, well, you can operate particularly for a transit system, and I can't speak for Hyperloop, I don't know enough, but if you can optimize the movement and synchronize the movement of mass transit vehicles, when one is braking and another is accelerating, you can share that energy. And we can see that just using algorithms that do that optimization, you can knock about 15 to 20% of the energy reduction down. And when you're already going with what we call a moving block system, where we're moving everything closely together, you already have a base improvement in the amount of energy required to move a person from point A to point B. So you can make it even better with these advanced control systems. And while 15% doesn't sound like a lot, when you think of a city, and one of our customers is New York City, Well, for traction power, which is the power moved to move the subway trains around the system, they're using the equivalent of a city of 1 million people per year. So that's a lot of CO2 reduction when you can simply use these algorithms to optimize that movement.
And I think from my perspective, I'm looking forward to a day where, I've got this balanced diet of transportation. So, I'll take my bike out one day, maybe walk another. There's going to be a lot more optimization of our route based on the day. If you start using Google's virtual assistant, you'll notice that you start getting notifications of it's time to leave now because traffic has started. I think we'll start seeing your choice of modality might depend on sort of where you have an appointment, time of day. But we're working on an electric bicycle right here in Ontario. We haven't we've announced the fact that we're working on it, but we haven't revealed it yet. But it's very interesting to look at these different modalities which will become important to people in maybe some zones may not have buses or cars, it may be pedestrians and bikes. We may do more stuff in the vehicles because they're connected. So whether it's the TransPod or the Chevy Bolt, you may actually be more productive in your work as you get in there already. And so, you don't have that drudgery or unproductive commute time. And maybe we'll start seeing a day where the family road trip isn't just about the kids heads down on their games. We've seen some examples from some universities around here about a sort of a shared experience in these vehicles. If you can imagine the windscreen as a sort of a way of having an augmented reality view of the world. We've had some interesting conversations about, let's say if I drove through Halifax, could I see how it looked during the Halifax explosion and share that historical moment with my family? It's a different type of car trip than sort of the way that we've sort of been reduced to our own sort of tablets and screens. So I think I'm looking forward to that, sort of reshaping that experience.
I agree, and that interconnectivity that you're talking about is very important too with what we're looking at as well, because both on the IT side, but also on the way it's constructed. So the mistake that we could make is if we treated TransPod as just one thing in isolation, and it's definitely part of a network. It has to be part of an intermodal network, considering how people will feed into such a long distance line with cars and trains and buses and so it's this intermodality kind of consideration is very important, especially when we do the modeling of our passenger throughput and we consider how people will actually have a seamless trip. Because if you say that you want to build a line between two cities, so Toronto-Montreal is one of the ones, so we're working on multiple different lines around the world. Toronto to Montreal is one that's often quoted that we're working on in Canada, and that's true. And so we can't just, if we just say, yes, we're going only from one position in Toronto and one position in Montreal and design the route between, well, you have to consider how do we connect up to other modes of transit? How do we, if at the TransPod station, if your pod arrives and you've gone through the acceleration cruising phase and then the braking phase, and then the airlocks go open up and you've equalized the pressure, you walk off the vehicle. Now we have all these people arriving at the station. Where are they going to go from there? And so whether it's connecting to subways, metro systems, trams, and really providing a seamless connection, that's very important. And even things like considering, well, what do these people have with them? Now that you have connections between cities where people otherwise would have flown between those cities, now they can just on a whim decide to go between those cities for the afternoon. Now do they have luggage with them? So we're storing luggage, we're doing things where it's a bit of a mix between business commuters or people that want to visit their friends for a few hours and then go back to the first city. So it's really a different way of thinking about how we relate to the cities around us.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what the future of transportation looks like from a high-level perspective and some of the benefits, cleaner, more connected, more varied, faster. Where are we at today in terms of the state of the art, and what are some of the infrastructure or technology requirements that we're going to have to kind of work through to get us to that kind of the benefits of the future? And Walter, you talked earlier about the huge data protection from connected vehicles and the 5G wireless networks. That seems like one place.
Very timely right now, considering what's in the news right now. So cybersecurity is going to play a key role in these systems. There's more data. These are critical systems. This is critical infrastructure, whether it's mass transit, hyperloop, or autonomous cars on the road. And you don't want to have those systems taken over and go rogue. Just don't want to go through all the scenarios. So part of it is to really look at how we secure the actual infrastructure. Since there's a lot of data too, we want to offer services, but we want to protect the anonymity of the people. Because I think as a consumer, you don't want Big Brother watching over you. And really, what we're going to see is a lot of artificial intelligence coming into the back end of these systems to support what I described, these types of capabilities. So with it has to come some, let's say, some regulations, in fact, what's going to be interesting is there's going to be a mix of both public and private systems. Again, going back into the autonomous vehicle, a for-profit type of operation versus a city that is running a service and so on. So there's going to be there are going to be some issues that have to be resolved at those levels of how these systems are going to play together and how they're going to equitably play together in that multimodal future.
So I'm getting signs from the back row that we should be holding up our mics higher so you can hear us better. So one of the things that we're certainly looking at is trying to have standards across municipalities and cities, and having some good open conversations about things that we're doing as a very large manufacturer of automobiles. We're coming out with a Cadillac which will do vehicle-to-vehicle communication. If it hits black ice, certain number of meters ahead of you, it's going to be able to tell another Cadillac, and we hope to smarten up whole fleets of cars so that there's safer transportation. Vehicles already, emergency vehicles can talk to the traffic lights. A fire truck can tell it to turn all green, but even regular vehicles knowing when a light is about to change is actually going to help improve safety and the safety of intersections. I think it'll be interesting seeing kind of what will the expenditure be needed for cities, because a lot of them are taking a wait and see approach in terms of the technology that are coming out. We're looking at some of the advances in AI and machine vision, which might provide some data that could supplement some of these cities, and thinking about what built infrastructure they need versus what could the transport provide in terms of data collection. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next few years.
I guess the only thing I would add with when you say infrastructure, I mean, definitely that's a huge task for us when we're designing the infrastructure of the system with vehicles that go at 1,000 kilometers per hour through a tube, and so this part of the philosophy that we have at TransPod, at least, is really focusing on the machine learning, AI systems, intelligent control, and also really getting the physics right. So really going to the core of the design, because you can go up to a certain point by having intelligent control systems, and then you have to say, okay, well, do we have the best physical design of the system? And that's one case where TransPod, there are two other American companies that are trying to build a Hyperloop design. One key difference, TransPod is really the Canadian company, and we have some key differences in our approach, in our focus on safety analysis, but also on the core design that we're doing. And so both the design of the vehicle, we're starting from the ground up, or we already started from the ground up, and really designed an optimal system of the vehicles and of the infrastructure to work together harmoniously in all facets of the physics, from aerodynamics to vibration dynamics, control systems, to work optimally in the long term for the optimal business case in a completely a completed line, a fully running line. So it's definitely a case where infrastructure forms a key role, and so that's why we have a bunch of industrial partners to be able to, because we're working on a large array of subsystems in-house, and we're working from experts around the world on a lot of the supporting infrastructure and really bringing that all together. So hopefully this is a made in Canada innovation that we can really bring to the world and be proud of.
There's a lot of technology being put to work even today, it sounds like, and big advances being made. Cadillac, 2018 Cadillac is going to have a ton of advanced features, moving towards a self-driving type of future. TransPod, 1,000 kilometers an hour. Maybe one of the things we need to think through too is, us as travelers and our acceptance of some of these new types of features. Do you guys have any thoughts on what it would take to allow someone to get comfortable with allowing a car to drive them with no driver, or getting into a Hyperloop type of structure that's going to travel at that speed?
So we do a lot of customer interviews, and we, when we got into looking at the electric bicycle, one of the things we wanted to look at was cities that are really trying to figure out, within the sort of congestion of, a place like India. So talking to people in India, and you talk to them about the electric bicycle, and the customer feedback is, well, children and women ride bicycles. And there's this sort of mix between, you're trying to solve for a real problem, but if there's an attitudinal challenge there, you need to figure out, well, where is this introduction going to work best? And sometimes we need to think carefully about where we're going to introduce certain things so that they're going to take hold. But there's also a bit of sort of rethinking the design principles around introducing something. So if I shift for a second into understanding things like lane keep assist. So we've got a feature that allows you to sort of center within the lines, and it will sort of gently nudge you over if you start driving over and maybe you're falling asleep a bit. We've had some feedback from a few customers that, I thought my car was pulling. And really that's our fault for not explaining it as part of that sales process and educating either salespeople, because if you've grown up in an era of selling cars based on how fast it goes from 0 to 60, as opposed to what is this actually doing when it's keeping me centered in a lane, it's a whole different conversation to be having with people. I'm going out to Trenton, Ontario in a few weeks to sit with a 50-year-old woman who actually is one of our best kind of customer delivery people, because she actually takes the time to pair your phone with you, to talk about the features that she thinks you will most need. And that's an example of, this is much more mass personalization than we've ever seen before. It becomes very much, how are you going to use this type of conveyance? So it's going to be not an easy period, but if we're expecting these big gains in terms of safety, but also using electrification or different modes, you can't underestimate some of these impediments to people's perception about what they will or won't do.
Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I could. I mean, you were asking about how do we convince people and market adoption, and just one interesting story with us is just whenever you're designing a new transportation mode, of course there's going to be a shift and people getting used to that mode, and actually, we have, even though Elon Musk is not really designing this, he just popularized the idea, we do have to thank him for at least getting the mass public used to the concept of a tube-based transport. And so that's a big, if anything, he's doing a very big marketing thing, which is a great service to us. But of course, since we're designing such a different system that's evolved quite a bit further, then at least still the basic concept is still there. of what people have to experience, and it's still the idea of going on board a vehicle like an aircraft type of experience where you have rows of seats in different, business class, economy class, or different fancy seating configurations that we have. But then getting used to that idea too, because then you're in a tube and you're going at very high speed, and so this tube, despite the renderings you see, we have if you at our booth we actually have a bunch of different visualizations of this and of all the infrastructure, and you can ask all the blueprints and everything. But some of the renderings, they have pictures of clear tubes, and that's just to allow you to see inside what it would look like. But with our system, of course, it's actually not clear. It's spiral welded steel tubes, so you're not actually seeing out of the tube. So we have other systems we're working on to be able to have virtual environments inside the vehicle, so you actually see the scenery going past you on the countryside at high speed. So it's just things like that. We have another system to replicate the optics of sunlight streaming down. So things like this that give people kind of a warm, inviting environment, and really it's only a thing that has to last for a few minutes because you're at your destination. But just things to deal with comfort level.
I think it's fairly simple in some respects. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's fairly simple. Fundamentally, we have to convince people that these systems are safe, very, very safe, and very, very reliable. And those are two sometimes competing objectives. Certainly having a system that's safe, but that frequently comes and stops is not going to be a good service. It's not going to be something that people will use. So it's that combination. In state-of-the-art systems today, certainly for mass transit, we have a lot of redundancy in the systems. And they call that, in our industry, what the operators want is something that they call no single point of failure. There's nothing that can break fail in any way, shape, or form that would trigger a safety violation of the system. So these new systems, and if we talk about autonomous vehicles, they still have a long way to go. If you look at the state of the art, which is convolutional neural networks, we're talking about rates of classification, of recognition of about 97, 98%. And certainly when we're talking about mass transit, if we want to have a safe system, we're talking about probabilities of an error occurring of 10 to the minus 9. So what we have to do is look at how we combine those sensors together, as an example, for an autonomous vehicle, so that any given sensor can have false information coming, but the combination of all of those together is still safe. Now, the other big challenge there is reliability, and look at the weather that we have in Canada. I'm working on this type of technology, and I think sometimes driving down the 401 when the rain is pouring down and I can hardly see out of the car, how are these systems going to work? Cameras, well, cameras are going to run into problems. Infrared camera, maybe, but depending on the conditions. LiDAR, well, if you have bad weather conditions, you can knock out LiDAR. GPS, urban canyons, what's going to happen there when you lose the signal, and so on. So for a system of the future that is going to achieve that safety and the reliability, these are still those engineering problems that have to be dealt with. And that fundamentally is going to be the difference between having systems that kind of generally assist and systems that take over, where, certainly in my case, maybe not watching historic Halifax, but snoozing during the drive. That's that future, that's the challenges to be overcome.
We've got about 10 minutes left here. Maybe I'll open it up to the audience for questions now, if there's any that you want to direct towards the panelists. I don't know if we have mics out there, or if you just want to stand up and... So there's one question at the back there. Yeah, yeah.
My name is Dmitry. I'm with Chillcare. It's a Toronto-based company. We developed the power wheelchairs. The question is to Ted, and it's about the bolt. You mentioned it's there. It's a nice piece of technology. Why would it still have to have the 12-volt battery there?
So you probably asked the wrong non-engineer out of all my engineering colleagues are here in terms of what we're doing with the Bolt. But I've got to say, we've done enough work in terms of understanding kind of the consumer demand for a long-range electric vehicle to tell you that it is very much in demand right now. It's got 383 kilometers of range. We can't sell enough, especially to fleets in Canada. There's a whole group in Quebec that's asking me for more for this Teo taxi in Quebec right now. There's going to be periods where we're going to see rapid evolutions of battery technology and range and things like that. As Ryan alluded to, we've got some competitors in this marketplace right now that are making rapid changes to how we propel our systems, and we are actively looking at partners to sort of keep on moving the state of the art forward with this. When you get into autonomous vehicles, the lifespan of any single autonomous vehicle, if it is operating 50, 60, 70% of the time, will be much faster turnaround of the sort of the base system that it's operating on, which will allow us to sort of adapt and renew the technology much faster. But it's a good question. I think we all want to move faster as an industry. We have certain regulations and parameters we operate within, certainly, but we are here in part because we partner with startups and academics to tell us kind of what we should be looking for next. But we also have our own engineers who might be happy to take some specific questions that you have afterwards.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the... I guess it's my turn. Thanks for the panel, really great. So obviously we're talking a lot about transportation technologies. I'm wondering if the panelists can give some thought or a little bit of reflection on innovation in the business models around how these models are actually delivered. So, Ted, you talked about sharing. Obviously, that's going to be likely an interesting thread. But as we get into different kinds of, transportation systems kind of converging and coming together, how do you see these kinds of technologies and the business models around them delivering these services in a really seamless way?
Well, just quickly, the model that we've certainly seen is rather than going purely on units sold, can we look at kilometers driven? And I add the sort of variation, can we look at enjoyed kilometers driven? Because I want to drive to that point. The second part is we're actually probably going to have a model that is based on data as well. So, there are lots of opportunities to think through what that might mean. So those are just two examples.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I'll just quickly add that on the business side here too, we have to consider both passenger types of vehicles and cargo too. And I guess that's one thing in common among all these industries. And the challenge with TransPod is we have route infrastructure in a tube, bidirectional, where we're designing the full design to be capable of carrying both cargo and passengers. Safety certification is more stringent for passenger transport, and that's actually what we're working on as we speak. But at the same time, we have to be capable of both, and the business model definitely wraps around both public sector and private sector involvement. So far, our own investment has been from the private sector, but we are definitely working with public sector, and that will only increase especially when you're talking about different locations around the world, because some places, let's take the United States, where sometimes the public sector is a dirty word, and there's so much private sector investment. But of course, obviously, there's a combination. In Canada, we have a mix too. In some countries, it's definitely connecting between cities. It's very clearly thought of as a national project or a regional project, and so very clearly there will be private sector investment. And so it's really different depending on the location, and sometimes a combination. And one thing to be clear with us, TransPod is not in the business of completely financing and constructing an entire line ourselves. It's really for each individual installation, each individual line between different cities. It's really about engaging a consortium to construct each line, and the business arrangements depend on the passenger flow models or what's being carried, even cargo. Sometimes there's even the option of having different clients that route different vehicles through the same infrastructure, and it's really the core design and the vehicles that we're building, and so there's quite a few different options, and it's kind of flexible in the same way that in rail and automotive, there are quite a few options. It's very open.
So certainly from the perspective of the transit industry, I think reliability and the amount of data that is coming out of the systems that are being placed all across transit through IoT starts to make a difference in the model. Today, they're extremely capital intensive. I mean, you can look at the example of Toronto and our ever-increasing cost for transit. So the cost of boring a tunnel until Elon Musk comes up with the next innovation is still going to be pretty high. But if you can build financial models based upon that data to look at, well, what are the costs going to be over 30 years? Can I make a business out of it? Do I have the kind of very good data coming in with passenger growth figures in terms of reliability for the system, preventing problems from occurring? It starts to look a lot more interesting as a service. So I think what's interesting is you could see maybe in this case, private sector consortia taking over that whole task of saying, look, we'll put in a transit system, we'll operate it for this many years, and it's an entirely different kind of financing package that can come out.
Great. Well, it looks like we might. Okay, last question, and then on to the reception.
All right. Hi, my name is Darren. I just had a question. You talked a lot about new technologies that have come up in the last few years: autonomous driving, interconnected systems, Hyperloop. When do you see that some of these technologies will actually be able to be in market and go beyond the piloting and actually start to make an impact in cities here and worldwide?
With TransPod, it's hello. Okay. With TransPod, it is definitely a schedule that we have. So it's not instantaneous. It's not running next year, but in the coming years. So we are working on all systems, all the subcomponents, both of the vehicles and the infrastructure. With partners, it's building up towards certification process in 2019-2020, and then after that, actual contracts with lines that are being built. So, and actually, we're in the stage of site selection for test tracks right now. So it's definitely, that's an example of a long-term project. It's not going to happen next week, but it is going to happen within our lifetime. So in the 2020s is our timeline for actually building.
Believe it or not, the official response is sooner than you think for autonomous vehicles. But one of the great things that I've been able to have conversations right here in our own backyard is we have this abundant crappy weather in Canada, so there's lots of folks who want to use that to test and put through its paces. You know, Walter had alluded to the problems that we still have to solve, and snow and slush covered is one of them. So if we can kind of get over some of these few last issues around making them safe in all sorts of situations, the regulators will be happy, the insurance people will be happy, and we're in active conversations with all of those groups.
I'll give you some good news from our perspective, and that is driverless mass transit systems are available now. Unfortunately, in Toronto, we don't have any, which would be kind of nice, but we do have quite a few systems deployed elsewhere in the world, and these are completely no train operators on the system. They are driven completely automatically. So what we're looking at is taking this new technology and making them into better driverless systems. So there's lots of areas where we can enhance the systems further with the addition of this new technology. But driverless systems and safety critical driverless systems do exist today and do exist in quite a few parts of the world.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Ryan and Walter and Ted for their insights that they shared with us here today, and enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.